If we look at what's been happening with e-learning tools in medical education over the last decade, we've had a wide range of learning tools that medical education has flirted with. And they've included all the kind of core knowledge tools, particularly animations and videos, and then all those communication tools like the Web2 stuff, social networks, blogs, forums. A wide range, you can see them, virtual places, virtual worlds, a wide range of tools. I think actually to a large extent, probably some people have been disappointed by how much they've been taken up. Should we say by how little they've been taken up? If you think of the AME conference, often 15 to 20% of the presentations actually had an e-learning context somewhere. And yet perhaps we haven't seen as much of that appearing in education as we might, and certainly hasn't really contributed to a curriculum transformation. So maybe the reason is that these tools are too fragmented. Most of the resources that our students use, which are live resources, are things they move from place to place, and they're easily contactable. But all of these resources are very fragmented. Even if they're put into a VLE, going just for one purpose. And maybe there is something that we can do about that. But I'm going to use it in a different context. Because what David Cook showed in 2006 was that different learning tools are ideal for different particular purposes, different areas of the continuum competency. So lectures and small group teaching and computer-aided instruction were really good for core knowledge. Standardization was ideal for history taking, for counselling. Patient simulators are very good for procedures and skills, clinical skills. And his emphasis was on the virtual patient as the ideal tool for clinical reasoning. But what I've been thinking about is, can we actually find some way of linking all of those all together into some integrated whole, which could actually then transform the curriculum? And the message probably that we can do that is probably in the last curriculum transformation, which is in scenario-based learning, problem-based learning, CBL, case-based learning. Because that kind of learning threw away the old ideas of having just a block of physiology, a block of pharmacology, and started with the case, and as the student explored the case, they would find all the various aspects of their learning. They would find their basic clinical sciences, their clinical skills, all the patient-doctor stuff. If you look at that, if that was, say, bronchial pneumonia, then the student would be looking at physiology of the lung, anatomy of the lung, principles of infection, things like that. So can we find a similar integrated way of actually dealing with E? So if we move on. Okay. That kind of curriculum transformation, you put all the resources into the case, is maybe one way that, in a very simple way, it doesn't have loads and loads of medical terms attached, medical education terms attached to it. It's a simple thing that actually works with students, and we know it works with students. Get it all together. Now, obviously the next step that we're actually likely to see is things like physiological simulations, and we are working on that. But this is actually maybe something that we haven't even thought about how we would use. And it's a special, well, if we play it. Okay, this is actually an interactive simulation with somebody in front of the screen using motion technology where you have full link up between the person, who's the operator, and and the individual actually the subject actually inside the computer. And you can hand them bits of paper, and you can give them instructions, and you can move things around. And it's a kind of technology which we don't really know yet how people will actually use. But if you take that kind of surface effect and you build that onto physiological simulations, then the likelihood is that you would end up with a really truly virtual patient.
Terry, can you just kind of clearly explain exactly where you think this interactive, put together package will be in the next 2 or 3 years?
Where it will be?
So the question was, where do we think in 2 or 3 years' time the interactive package will go?
John, be slightly more specific. When and where would it go? I mean, do you mean actually physically where would it fit?
It's been very exciting for the last 2 or 3 years in the world of electronic advances into traditional curriculum. I mean, what I'm excited about is actually where we're going to be in the next few years, and we're going to plan curriculum ahead. Where do you think we're actually going to be able to get to in that kind of time, technologically?
Well, I think we already, even with case-based learning back in the 60s, we were starting to move to, in theory, a more immersive environment. And so that trend will actually continue. If you look at physiological simulations, and you and I have both been involved in a bit for that recently, you're going to see actually much more the ability to mimic more directly what the practitioner has to do. And so it's often about taking actions. I think that's the most important thing of all. So we are going to see actually something much, much more real in terms of our replacement of existing technologies. So the things that we've got now, which is decision-making, cases, greater simulation, physiological simulations, a patient that looks like a patient, and a patient that you can actually interact with. I think those are the things actually we're bound to see, because technology can deliver that comparatively easily. And I have to say, we are actually delivering the PBL this year in Second Life. And we've had no failures with that either at George's yet. And we had no failures when we actually did the interactive whiteboards, which Peter will remember was a great worry at George's that we might actually fall over on that. But when we came here, we knew we had a fresh challenge.
Is there any evidence yet as to how students' learning styles affect the way they're going to adopt a second-life learning type environment, or is it not being rolled out enough yet to look at that? Do they accept it? Do they all accept it?
No, I think actually often they don't. I mean, I think there are lots and lots of experiments actually in Second Life. I think actually it's not ready, fundamentally it's not ready. I don't mean just because it fell over today, because it doesn't do that most of the time. But it doesn't do that, in fact I've never seen that happen before. No. But it's because it's not really delivering enough yet. So it's an interesting experiment, and it's regarded as an interesting experiment for the practitioner, interesting experiment for the teacher, and the students actually will be absorbed by it for a very short time. But we already know that we will actually have to move a lot further. And I think it's got to actually, if it's going to be truly immersive, it's got to have a much greater degree of reality about it. At the moment, you can increase functionality. That particular simulation we have there for training paramedics was interesting, but typically the paramedics and the teachers will come and use it, and then will go away again, and they may not return. We need to move on a lot.